All right, guys. Hey, we are live. This is the Difference Makers podcast. Today we have with us Aryan Fazeli. Aryan is the founder of K Nutri Supplements, and he holds a master's degree in science, and he's completed his thesis on the ketogenic diet and the impact of the diet on obesity and cancer. So, Aryan, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me here.
So you have a really unique and crazy story, and I kind of want to start at the beginning and then work your way to kind of now. But let's just first of all, thank you and welcome. Aryan did his podcast for K Nutri, and I was one of the first guests on his show. So we've kind of come full circle here. Now he's coming on the Difference Maker. So this is a fun one for me. So talk to me about, let's start with your master's, and we'll talk about how this all kind of connects together in a second. But it's kind of a weird coincidence, and you can tell that story.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll make the background of all this pretty quick, but basically, I went into university with the intention of becoming a dentist. That was my goal as a career, and I found myself very overweight after about the first year of university, as most people do. I neglected my diet. I neglected exercise in pursuit of studying and getting good grades and sort of just keeping my head in the books. And so, on this path to dentistry during my undergrad, I became fairly unhappy with how I looked and how I felt. And so, what I decided to do was just do a whole bunch of research and see how I can lose this weight. And I came across the ketogenic diet, and it seemed really interesting to me and sort of counterintuitive to sort of eat fat and then lose fat. But I decided to experiment anyways. And so, I think it was about my third year, and I saw some pretty incredible results from doing a ketogenic diet. And this was after, a couple of years of struggling to lose like that freshman 15 or 20 or whatever it was. Um, and yeah, I saw some amazing results. I felt great for the first time in a long time. And it sort of just, sparked my passion for, not just the ketogenic diet, but health and fitness in general. And so I wanted to take a deeper look at that route. And so I got to my final year. I got accepted to dentistry school, to New York University School of Dentistry. And I just wasn't that happy about that path. I wasn't that excited about it. So I took a year off, and by chance, the restaurant that I was working at, where I was, serving and bartending, my professor used to live just down the street. So my professor from exercise physiology actually was visiting with some buddies, and I ran into him. This was during my gap year. I ran into him, and I asked him, "Do you have any spots in your lab? I'd like to take a closer look at my master's. I'm really passionate about diet and exercise, and I think I could pursue this and maybe see what comes of it." And so that's kind of how it all started with my master's. And I enrolled that following fall. And so my master's pretty much looked at the ketogenic diet, but more importantly, what the impacts were of sugar in the diet, and what the impacts were of having a higher body fat percentage, and how that kind of ties into cancer, your odds of getting cancer, your odds of beating cancer. And those three, I think, are sort of interconnected, right? Diet, and then obviously if you have a poor diet, that could lead to obesity. And then, we see higher cancer rates with obese patients to begin with. And I actually learned a lot from that lab. Not only did I learn about the ketogenic diet, which I was already passionate about, but more importantly, the harms of sugar. I think in the diet industry, there's a lot of different perspectives. I know that it seems like people are always arguing, at least on the internet. There are some health experts that say that the ketogenic diet is the devil. And there are some, health experts that say high carbs are the devil. And so, instead of really coming to like a conclusion, it seems that people spend a lot of time arguing. When in reality, what we can say is that harmful sugars, and an abuse of carbohydrates is the main culprit. I think the ketogenic diet community, the low carb community, paleo, Whole30, and any other, traditional diet community can really come together and just agree on that one simple fact that processed sugars, refined sugars, and an abuse of carbohydrates can lead to you being overweight. and that sort of all ties into cancer. And so the main points that we sort of took away from the lab based on my research, other research, the published data from our PhD students, and the general common knowledge of the science community that studies cancer and obesity, is that with obesity, you get a different type of fat tissue. So we call that adipose tissue. We all have it. Nobody is 0% body fat. Even lean athletic people have adipose tissue. But we see that the adipose tissue in obese people has a different hormonal profile. So it almost acts as like sort of like a hormonal gland, because it releases certain elements into your body that can affect things like cancer. And so, the main thing that our lab looked at is that in an obese person, the adipose tissue can not only worsen cancer, but it can make the cancer spread faster. And then contrary to that, we see that in lean people who have sort of like a lean adipose tissue profile, we see that those people can actually slow down cancer growth or the spreading of the growth. So two very, very important things. And then the 3-point summary of, sort of obesity and cancer is: one, if you are a lean person or you have lean adipose tissue, you're more likely to tolerate chemo treatment better and have a better response to it, right? So it's not just your likelihood of getting it, but it's your
Yeah.
likelihood of beating it. So now you've improved your chances of not just getting it, but also beating it. The second is that you typically have a better outcome afterwards. So your ability to recover, let's say from chemotherapy, from surgery, or from anything else. And three, like I said, you reduce the chances of cancer spreading when you're battling it to begin with, which may not sound like something you want to plan for ahead of time, but as you and I both know, and as I'm sure anyone listening to this who has family members that have had cancer, which is a very good chance, you never really planned for cancer, and it doesn't discriminate. So if you're young, healthy, male, female, the color of your skin, you're still have a chance of getting cancer at some point in your life.
I had no idea that the adipose tissue um, acted differently hormonally in obese people. That's a unique point. I don't think I've ever had that information presented to me in any way.
Yeah, that's one of the first things that I learned when I went to the lab, because our PhD student, I have to shout out Chris, who is now actually a doctor, which is awesome. He kind of kept tabs on me when I was going through treatment, which I'll get into in a little bit. But basically, yeah, he sort of went really deep into that research. They never went into clinical trials, but his study on mice was very impressive and sort of showed what we call adipokines. And so that's something that your fat cells release, and it creates sort of like a hormonal environment. Same way that, some of your other glands would release hormones. They say that adipose tissue acts very similarly, which is very interesting.
Hmm. When people say that, like people have they're genetically, from like an obese family or something like that, could that have any impact on that?
I think so. I think there's always a chance of you being predispositioned to
Hmm.
anything, including obesity. I think obesity is the one thing in general that we can control the most. So more likely than not, you can say you have a genetic predisposition to a certain type of cancer, like
Yeah.
say, lung cancer or breast cancer, which luckily they're doing a lot more genetic screenings for. But I think obesity, luckily, is the one thing that we can control, at least to a great extent. They look at obviously obesity as more of like a disease now, and so the treatment or the way that you view it has to be a little bit different as well. But it's definitely the one thing that we can control the most. And unfortunately, obesity rates are only continuing to increase. And there's really no emphasis on prevention. And all the money really goes into treatment, which has also been shown to be much more expensive than, preventing obesity to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Okay, so let's kind of dive deeper into your story. You said something about, your treatment, but let's tell everybody what you kind of went through in your experience here and how this all ties together.
Yeah, for sure. And so this story kind of dates back to 2019. So it's been about 2 years now, which is fairly recent if I kind of think about it. But basically, I was working out at your gym at CrossFit Solid Ground, and Justin at the time was doing some programming for me. I was really into functional bodybuilding at the time, and so after spending 10, 12 years exercising, bodybuilding, doing CrossFit, messing around with diets, I had never really committed myself 100% to working out and dieting and really getting like the most out of my my gym sessions. I just sort of got content with looking pretty good, feeling pretty good, and performing pretty good, but never really going pushing myself to the limit. So
Yeah.
I got some programming from Justin the summer of 2019, and I started following like a moderate to higher carb diet. I was weighing and tracking all of my food. I was eating very healthy. I was prioritizing sleep, and I was about 2 months into Justin's programming. So I got into the best shape of my life, and it was incredible. Like the changes that I saw from 2 months of really committing myself was already awesome. So I was, it was around the end of August 2019, best shape of my life. I looked and felt great. And then I started to feel like kind of sick, which was weird because it's August, and I'm working out, I'm eating well, but I just sort of assumed I was burnt out because I was working a full-time job. I was running my business on the side, my supplement business, and then I was also committing an hour and a half to working out every day and meal prepping, and I didn't really have any free time. So I was like, maybe you're just pushing yourself a little bit hard. And then the symptoms sort of started to get worse. So I had an elevated heart rate, which was kind of odd. I wasn't able to sleep. So it just feels like when you have coffee like too close to bed, and your heart is just racing, you can't sleep. So that was the first thing I noticed. And then I started to develop a cough with some chest pains, and I felt off. Like I knew something was wrong, but
Yeah.
how are you supposed to know? And if you assume the worst, you sort of sound like a hypochondriac, and it just sounds silly to think of the worst when you have a chest pain.
Yeah.
And so the end of August came around, this cough got worse. So I was like, you know what, I gotta go to the doctor. So I went to the walk-in, got diagnosed with bronchitis, and the doctor at the walk-in said, if you feel worse, go get an X-ray, or go to the hospital. So a couple of days went by, the antibiotics were not working, and so again, you don't think of the worst, but something's wrong.
Mhm.
So instead of going to just get an X-ray, I was like, you know what, let me go to the hospital. So I went to an amazing hospital. I have to also shout out Markham Stouffville Hospital for the care that they had when I went there. But I went to Markham Stouffville Hospital, and they did X-rays, and so the X-rays came back with like a large mass, and so I got diagnosed with pneumonia, and I got sent home with more antibiotics. And then same thing, a couple days later, I was feeling terrible. I was feeling really, really terrible. So I was like, you know what? I got to go back to the hospital. There's no sense for going to the walk-in. So I went back to the hospital, and this time they did a CT scan. And so I remember I was with Brittany, who's my fiance now, but we were together. And so I waited, and then they kind of put us into our room. They're like, the doctor will be with you in a second. And I could tell something was really off because the nurse who put us into that room didn't have like a great look on her face. And to put us to like a private room with the door closed, it was like a lot of warning signs that you don't want to
Yeah.
accept. And so the doctor walked in, and he sat down, and he said the reason the antibiotics not working is because you have a tumor in your chest. So Brie and I we were sort of in shock, and I just remember just like looking at her, and then looking back at the doctor, and then like it took like 5 seconds for me just to accept that that was the scenario I was in, and I just said like, what next? Because
Mhm.
I mean, at least that's in my personality is like if something happens, I just want to figure out like how can I fix this? Like what do we do now?
Yeah.
So, I didn't really take any time to process it. I was just like, what do we do now? And I could tell everything was, quite serious because of how terrible I felt.
Mhm.
And so, essentially, I had a football-sized tumor in my chest, and it didn't seem, like the prognosis didn't seem that bad at the time. But when they did some more testing, and when they did a biopsy to see what type of cancer it was, they said so it was a germ cell tumor, and there's a lot of different subtypes of germ cell tumors. Some are not cancerous, some are not even that harmful, some have a 96% survival rate. But this one, because of the cell types, it had a 50% survival rate. So, I heard that like a week later. Um, and at the time, my symptoms were only really getting worse. So it took, a decent amount of time, about a week, for me to get into chemo and sort of start this treatment regimen. And, every day that went by, the tumor, at least they estimated, was growing by like a centimeter. So it was one of those situations where if I had gone in on August 30th instead of August 29th, like I might not be here today. That's just how fast it was growing. And so, luckily, the doctors at that hospital, they expedited everything. I got the biopsy the next day. I got the results the day after that. I got rushed into chemo after the weekend. Like everything was expedited. Typically, this process takes weeks.
Yeah.
So in that regard, I got extremely lucky. And so I got rushed into chemotherapy. And, it was towards the end of that week, I finished my first round of chemotherapy, and I was feeling terrible. Like I was feeling obviously the effects of chemo, and then I was feeling even worse. Like I wasn't sure. Something felt like it was really, really wrong. Even though everything already feels terrible when you have cancer and this football-sized tumor in your chest and you're undergoing chemo, like I couldn't even get out of bed to walk, because when I would get up, the pressure that the tumor was putting on my heart and the veins around it, it would cause me to go lightheaded and like nearly like black out. So I spent a lot of time just laying down, and feeling like very helpless. And so, yeah, the first week went by, and I got released after my first round of chemo. So I went home, and then that next night, I just felt like terrible. I had like a really bad fever. I hadn't slept in weeks, but I still couldn't sleep. And then the Sunday morning, I had to go into the hospital for like a routine shot. So basically, when you're on chemo and you finish a cycle, they give you these shots that you inject into your belly, and they boost your white blood cell count, because chemo sort of kills your immune system. It kills
Yeah.
anything that's rapidly growing, which includes your healthy immune cells.
Hmm.
So you have to take these shots, just put them in your belly every morning, and they boost your white blood cell count, brings your immune system back up. So for the first shot, you have to go into the hospital and do it, because they want to supervise you, make sure you know how to do it yourself, and make sure you don't have any allergies or adverse reactions, right? It's like pretty common. So my dad and I went to the hospital that Sunday morning, and I felt terrible. Like I couldn't even stand up in line. I was sitting the whole time. And so, get to the front of the line at the emergency room, because you got to go through like the whole routine. And, luckily we did, because they took my temperature, they checked my heart rate. My heart rate was like 140, which is your heart
Resting
rate.
heart rate, you're
Yeah,
140.
resting heart rate, which is what most people are at when they're doing like a moderate jog, I would say. So it was at 140, and right away the nurse was alarmed. And then they checked my temperature, and it was at like 39. And anything over 38 is considered a fever. So at the time, they thought I had sepsis. So they thought I had infection in my blood. And so that's like the last thing you want as a cancer patient.
Yeah.
So I got admitted, put on IV, 3 different types of antibiotics over the next 2 days, a whole bunch of testing to figure out like what's wrong, because they couldn't find any bacteria in my body. So I'm scared. I'm feeling again worse and worse every single day somehow, because the chemo hadn't really started kicking in yet. So the tumor's still growing, slowly, while the chemo sort of takes effect. And so, yeah, I just remember feeling awful. And then the results came back, and basically the tumor had spread into the lining that surrounded my heart. And so that lining filled up with, I think, just over a liter of fluid. And so you have like, yeah,
This is where the story gets like crazy to me.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I had a liter of fluid surrounding my heart. So picture like, the insides of your body, like you can just like look down at yourself and see that there's not like a lot of room, right? You can feel like
Yeah.
your rib cage, you can feel like your muscles, and like this roughly the size of your heart and all of your different organs. And it's like
Hmm.
already there's no room for a football-sized tumor to grow. So it's pushing everything out of the way. It's compressing everything.
Yeah.
And so what happened was my heart lining, because you have a lining around your heart that's supposed to protect it as like a sac. It had filled up with just over a liter of fluid, which was the reason I was having a high heart rate for about 4 or 5 days in a row. So I was going at like 140, 150 beats per minute for like 4 or 5 days straight, nonstop. Like it's really even hard to fathom how my heart kept going through all that, because from what I understood and what I heard from the doctors, and one of my friends who's a nurse, is that if you have a cup or two, like up to 500 milliliters of fluid around your heart. It's enough to stop your heart from beating. So, already, we're at this point, and luckily they found out what was wrong. I got into like a not so invasive surgery. They sort of just they sedated me. They put a needle in between my two ribs, and they like pulled the fluid out. They like suctioned it out. And I was awake through the whole thing, which was kind of crazy, but um, it was, yeah, it was wild. And to just know that, my history of exercise or eating well for like, 10 years prepared me for this one moment was pretty incredible, because I don't think I would have survived. And I think any doctor that knows this story or hears about it would probably agree that if you're not healthy, or if you don't have a strong heart, or if you're not used to putting yourself under some sort of endurance, that your heart is just not going to last at 150 beats per minute constantly. And I think for me, that was, I want to guess 4 or 5 days. It could have been longer, but really, like, it was unbelievable.
So many crazy things about this. So, I mean, if you can picture your heart, right? And the lining of your heart surrounding it. So the muscle is beating, or muscles pumping blood. And then the lining is slowly filling up with fluid, right?
Mhm.
So it's between, it's like created a sac that's just now filling up with more and more fluid, right?
Yeah.
And all of that is compressing and pushing on your heart and making it beat 150 beats per minute, 140, 150 beats per minute,
Yeah.
right? Like most of you guys have Apple Watches or Whoops or something like that. Think about like what exercise you're doing at 140 to 150 beats per minute, and then maintain that for 4 to 5 days, potentially more. And then think about like when you're underwater too. The further you get underwater, the more pressure it is, the harder it is to, like, I don't know, breathe. Like you can feel that compression for somebody who's not like a professional diver. If you dive underwater like a couple feet, you feel that pressure of the water, right? And then now that fluid is doing that to your heart. And then, like you said, like a cup to 500 mils is enough to stop like a normal person's heart rate or heart who is inactive. So it's incredible that you're able to survive that with a liter of fluid. And
Yeah.
realistically, the only way, that you were able to survive that is because of how fit you were.
Mhm.
And like
Yeah.
you were active your whole life, but like like that thought to me when you told me that story originally, and I talked to the nurse, I think it's the same one that it was a Bailey.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I talked to Bailey about it at the time, I was like blown away. Like
Yeah.
that, the fact that you could survive that like speaks to how important fitness is on something like that. Like a normal person couldn't have survived that.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's an extreme scenario. I mean, the type of cancer that I had, and the timing of it, and all of these other things that happen, is like 1 in 10 million. Like the chances of someone listening to this, chances of this happening to you may not be likely, but I think it's an important enough case study that, if you're listening to this and maybe you're out of the habit of exercising, or if you've been eating poorly lately, or something in your life has got you down or out of routine, it's a really good life check to say, it's just beyond having a six-pack and looking good when you go to Mexico. It could save your life. And I felt that in that moment, I felt that I had been training my whole life for this moment, because
Yeah.
if I had taken a different path at like 16, 17, sort of when like my sports era was ending with like high school sports and other sports that I was doing at the time, and instead of going back into the gym and like pursuing a different path, I yeah, I don't know if I'd be here today. And even that couple months leading up to this incident, like I said earlier, I was training like the most intensely I've ever trained in my life. I was putting in a lot of hours in the gym, a lot of time eating well, and I had an enormous amount of muscle mass. So I was, the biggest and leanest I'd ever been. And, I don't know if I've ever shared it publicly, but when I got home after that incident with the heart, so I had gone through my first round of chemo, and
Mm-hmm.
then I was on antibiotics for like 5 days for no reason, but because they thought something was wrong, and then they pulled out the fluid in my heart. Like that week where I didn't know what was going on and I was just in the hospital, I had fevers around the clock on top of my heart rate. So my body just didn't know what to do. It was getting fevers because it thought something was wrong.
Mhm.
And so we would try to break those fevers with Tylenol. Sometimes they wouldn't break. And basically, I would take Tylenol like every 4 hours and I would sweat for like 30 minutes straight. Like I would have to change my shirt like 3 times. It looked like I jumped into a pool. And that was like around the clock. Like I just didn't
Jeez.
sleep. I just sat in my bed and I would just stare at the clock because I couldn't sleep and because I had a fever. And then when the fever would break, I would sweat like I can't even tell you. I would sweat and I would have to put on like 3 different t-shirts within the hour. And so that was for about a week straight. And so I went through all of this like enormous amount of trauma that first month. And so finally, when the fever stopped and I started to feel better, they let me go home to rest up before my next round of chemo. And I guess I had been through this process for about a month now, and I lost so much weight. I was like 200 lean, very lean.
Yeah,
And
you
I
were
remember,
shredded before all of this. Like
yeah, yeah,
you were lean and like fairly bulky.
yeah. I mean, I felt and looked great. And I'm not trying to, talk myself up, but just that's how I felt at the time. And when I got home after that first month of like chemo and the stuff with my heart and all the fevers and antibiotics, I'm pretty sure I lost like 65 pounds. And it's like it should be physically impossible to lose. I think I went down to like I think I was like 130, maybe 140. And like I took a picture of myself in my living room and I was like bones. Like I lost every ounce of muscle in my body in 4 weeks. And it was so hard to believe. And it also made me think, what if I didn't have this muscle mass to begin with?
Yeah. You were I mean, I saw you kind of around that time, I think. Um I saw you once and it was like a different person, like unrecognizable
Yeah.
from the person I'd seen a month prior.
Yeah.
And to see you with no, I've never known you sorry, I never knew you before you had a beard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the one thing, like no beard, no hair, like coming in, like it was
Yeah.
it was a shock.
Yeah.
And but that being said, throughout your treatment, you were still getting back into the gym and starting to be active again.
Oh yeah, that was like the one thing I look forward to. And unfortunately it was hard because obviously like the first month was a complete write off.
Yeah.
And then, when things started to get back to normal, I had to be very careful because obviously you don't want to catch a cold or get sick while you're undergoing chemo. Your immune system's weak. So it was very frustrating for me because I really wanted to come in and work out. And I did. I got into the gym, I think like twice a week. I just did something, anything, get out of the house, lift some weights. And, like I got my strength back pretty quickly, even while I was going through chemo. I think I have a video of me dumbbell benching like 100 pounds for like 4 or 5 reps. This is like
Yeah.
in October, November that year, just after my chemotherapy had ended. So it was also a really good mental escape for me. And if you think about, a lot of people have experienced this during COVID, but you might have had jobs. But for anyone like unemployed during COVID or going through like a transition, when you're sitting at home and like you don't have something to work on. I mean, I had my business, but I didn't spend 16 hours a day doing it. And I was just like, I was going stir crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like I was sitting at home and I was thinking about all these things I should be doing, working out, eating well, going to work, living my life. And I was just like, I felt trapped. So the gym was definitely a really good escape for me. It felt great to come in and push some weights, reinstill that like mental confidence that lifting weights already gives you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I mean, and I mean, we can finish up the cancer treatment story because like you still had a ways to go.
Yeah, definitely. So I went through 4 rounds of chemo, and then still like you're unsure of what's going to happen. So I still had a large mass left inside me. So December of that year, so even it was like everything was so quick. It was like 3 months of chemo. Then they rushed me into surgery before the Christmas break, and so they opened up my chest. I had full sternotomy, and basically they removed the tumor. They removed the lining of my heart in case there were some leftover active cancer cells in there, and they removed my phrenic nerve. So you have two phrenic nerves that control your diaphragm. Now I'm missing one, so I'm down to just one left.
I didn't even
So
know that.
yeah, the tumor was so heavily wrapped around it on this left side that they couldn't like resect the tumor without taking the nerve. Um, and then they took, I think it was one third of my left lung. So yeah, so basically there's a whole bunch of staples inside me from what I understand, and then they stapled my chest shut as well. And it was just everything was so wild. There's so many times where like you didn't really know what was going to happen, because even when they opened me up, they actually took a biopsy of a bunch of parts of the tumor, and they went and got it tested. And if the tumor was active, they had to actually sew me back up, and then I had to undergo like a more intensive treatment. So it was like, yeah, going under surgery wasn't even like the end. And then also after the surgery, there was still a 50% chance that the cancer would come back within 3 months. So it was like, it just really felt like it was never ending. There were all these like
Yeah.
speed bumps and times when like things could take a turn for the worse at any moment. So it was, yeah, it was like nonstop pretty much. But I finished surgery. Luckily, all the tumor tissue inside me was necrotic or dead, and so they removed everything. And I went home and did a lot of blood work the next few months, and everything came back clear. And it's been since the surgery was 2 years ago, almost to the day. Actually, next week will be 2 years,
Oh,
and my
wow.
recent CT scans and blood work came back clear. And so they don't call it remission, but I have no evidence of disease. So so
Okay.
far, I'm in the clear, and everything's good. So
Nice. Hey, I'm really
yeah.
glad to hear that. That's good news. But it's crazy to me that this is all within the last 2 years, and even all your treatment was within like 4 months.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
that seems really fast. Maybe it's just me, but that's like no, like fast for like a round of treatment like that?
It is really fast. I mean, traditionally, they would make you wait longer till you had your
Mhm.
surgery because they want you to be a little bit healthier, but there
Yeah.
was a lot of risk for me. So doctors have to weigh like the risk to reward.
Yeah.
And then even with starting treatment, it takes weeks for someone to get a biopsy and then get, a seat to do chemotherapy. So for me to go like within 1 week of getting my CT scan to treatment, and then within 3 weeks, 4 weeks of finishing my last round of treatment to getting surgery, everything was expedited because of how severe the tumor was. So it was almost like a blessing and a curse. What I went through was very difficult, but because of the severity, I had to get everything expedited, or else, every day was critical.
Yeah.
And so, the other thing is tumors that grow quickly respond better to chemotherapy because they target rapidly growing cells. So again,
Mhm.
that was sort of in my favor, which sounds odd, but it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
It makes
everything was
sense.
very quick. So I mean, some people spend years battling cancer, and it comes back, and then you got to battle. Some people spend 5, 10 years battling cancer.
Yeah.
So for me, as traumatic as it was to go in and out within like 4 months, and then I obviously spent a couple months healing the bone, which was like recovering from an injury. But the whole process was like 6 months. It was like it was like August to March, like 6, 7 months, and I was done with cancer.
Dude, it's crazy. It's such a crazy story.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
this
it
is,
really is.
like doing your masters on uh, the impacts of obesity and cancer. Did it make you feel a little bit more comfortable knowing a little bit more of the ins and outs? Like you would have a much more intimate knowledge of cancer and cancer treatments because of your masters.
Yeah, I felt very confident in my ability to undergo chemo, to handle it well, to respond well to it afterwards. And initially, it was like everyone else that gets cancer. It's like, well, why me? But you very quickly change your perspective because bad things happen to everyone, including cancer. It
Yeah.
doesn't discriminate. So I just became glad, and instead of sulking on the fact that I was healthy and got cancer, I instead was very happy that I was healthy and could at least put up a battle. And if I had to pick a time in my life, like draw a timeline of you know 10 years old to 80 years old, hopefully I live to old age. But if I had to draw a timeline and like pinpoint a spot in my life where I would have liked to get cancer or like go through something like this, it would
Yeah.
have been exactly when it happened. I just think that a lot of things aligned for me to, be taking my health as seriously as possible, to put on as much muscle mass as possible, to have my heart as healthy as possible, and to just be, yeah, young and able to fight it and recover from it. So yeah, I'm just lucky to be alive and healthy right now.
Man, it's um yeah, oddly enough, it picked a good time to try to hit you.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like I said, from the research in my lab, everything kind of came full circle where I had a good understanding of the things were always in my favor in terms
Yeah.
of, you want to look at like a statistic. So, they tell you 50% chance of surviving, but are there subsets of statistics that will categorize healthy people, people that exercise? Do they categorize it by lean body mass and,
Yeah.
years spent exercising? No. So there's a lot of variables that you have to sort of keep in your own head to, stay optimistic and stay positive. Because 50% is a weird number, right? Like a coin toss it's a 50-50 event.
Yeah.
Anytime something can go one way or the other, it's very tricky to not think about it. So that's what I tried to do.
Good man. Fuck. It still blows me away every time we talk about this stuff. Like, it blows me away that you were, that you went through everything, and did good for you for keeping the attitude that you did during the time.
Yeah, thank you.
But okay, let's talk about now. Let's move into your supplement company. So we've got K Nutri uh, supplements. How how did that all come about? How did you start K Nutri? Um, tell me about the start, and then we'll talk about the products a little bit and like what you guys do that's unique to the industry.
Cool. Yeah. So, like I said earlier, I experimented with the ketogenic diet, and I had a difficult time finding supplements that sort of aligned with my goals. Supplements
Mhm.
that, like, obviously didn't have sugar or were like complete in the sense of, like, for example, a complete multivitamin. And so, looking at some of the products that my family and friends were taking, as well as things that I was looking for, I sort of told myself, I'll work on this as like a side project during my master's, and when I'm done my master's, I'll launch it. So that's what I did. I launched it a couple weeks after I got my master's degree, and so we started a lineup of products, sort of tailored towards, any goal, but they happen to be sugar free and suitable for like low carb diets. So, we've done like a complete multivitamin pack. We focus a lot of our products around collagen protein, which I'm a big believer in. And then we have sort of some staples like, BCAs, pre-workout, pretty standard products that, I find value in. I think a lot of other people use in their day to day.
So you're okay. So with your products, all low carb focused. Not to say that that's, like for some people out there, gonna be like, oh, low carb, like that's just a fad, whatever. But you put the research into these. It's not just like you came out of nowhere. Like, you have experience with this. What are some of like the obstacles you've had to face with being kind of labeled as, or I mean, you guys label yourself as low carb?
Yeah, I think people are very vocal in on social media, especially with regards to dieting. And dieting culture it's a strange thing. I've been thinking a lot about it recently. Like, for example, I'll see people who will post a transformation video. Like, they'll show that they lost, let's say, 200 pounds using like a ketogenic diet,
Yeah.
and so they went from like 300 to like 150, and now they're like living their best life. They're super happy with what they're eating, how they're doing it, and they never would have been able to lose that weight without, let's say, doing a ketogenic diet. And then people will respond and comment, like, you shouldn't do that, it's unhealthy, or carbs are really good for you, and this and that. But it's like, the way I see it is every diet is a tool, right? So you have like this toolbox, and in that toolbox, you have Whole30, and you have Paleo, and you have
Mhm.
Keto. And depending on what your goals are, or how your body responds to these tools, you'll go and use different ones. So in my experience, my body responded very poorly to carbs in terms of trying to lose fat. I have a very large appetite, and yeah, like I have a very difficult time
Yeah.
adjusting my body composition on a carbohydrate diet. So for me, keto is in my toolbox, and it is for a lot of other people. And so when I want to cut body fat, I use a ketogenic diet because it's easy for me and I enjoy doing it and I see results. And then when I want to put on muscle, or let's say I want to focus on different goals like strength, then I'll, change it up and do something closer to paleo. So I'll have clean carbs and just things that sort of fall in line with what I'm looking for. So yeah, there's always a backlash when you put a label on anything. I think even the other way around, people from maybe from like the keto community will target someone who's on paleo and say you don't need those carbs. But it's at the end of the day, whatever works for you. And I find that we have a customer base that finds value in our products, and I
Mhm.
think it sort of shows that the products work well for them, because anytime you get people that are repeat customers, that love the products, they leave good reviews and they come back and use it again, it means that they're finding value in their life for it, which is really important for me. And I think it makes me really happy that we started what we started, because we do get, emails when things are out of stock saying, this was such a core part of my routine. Things feel off, and I love the way your products make me feel. And that's all I really need to hear from customers, to know that I'm doing the right thing, that my
Yeah.
products are on the right track, and that again, people are finding value out of what we're selling.
Yeah. 100%. What are your um you know, you're going through all of this. You're going through cancer treatment and running the company at the same time
Yeah,
and trying to grow it, expand it. And then we hit pandemic.
yeah.
So what were some of the things that you had to juggle with hitting that pandemic and still being able to keep your business afloat?
Man, it was really hard. So obviously going through chemo and running the business was challenging. And luckily I have, Brittany is not just my fiance, but she runs the business with me. And so she did a lot of work while I was, not able to open my eyes. And then we launched a lot of our products from my hospital bed. And so when I got cancer, I was only like 6 months into this newfound business. And I took my life savings, I took like 100K that I made from waiting tables for 6 years. So literally like everything I'd ever made from, a very difficult job, in my opinion, and put it all in this business. And so not being able to really work on it or put that, lifetime investment to good use, or, be able to spend the time I needed to grow that business was really frustrating. And then, when I got home and I was recovering from surgery, I had a lot more free time to work on that business. And it was leading up right up to the pandemic. So, as we sort of started to get the ball rolling, the pandemic hit, and it was just terrible. It was like one thing after another, right? Because I
Yeah.
literally just finished recovering from surgery, March 2020. I went to Solid Ground. I went to your gym. I got one workout in. The next morning, they closed everything. And who knew that lockdown would last? I mean, we're getting to almost 2 years. It seems like things are still going, but
Yeah.
I never would have guessed. So it was very difficult for me mentally, because I also moved into a condo. And so Brittany and I, we were in this condo. We couldn't leave. We couldn't work out. Gyms were closed. And it was the one thing I was looking forward to. Luckily, I did have my business to work on. And then that sort of brought on its own set of challenges with the pandemic. So we started to grow. We sort of brought on, a lot of brand ambassadors, and we picked up a lot of momentum. Things started to go really, really well.
Yeah.
And then we got hit with so many different things, and I still don't know how we're operating today as a result of those things. So the first thing that happened was we had like a keto bar. So we had like a low carb protein bar.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the ingredients that we were using at the time was considered to be a fiber. And right around March, April, the FDA decided that that ingredient is no longer categorized as a fiber. It's now considered to be a non fiber. And so that simple change in that ingredient meant that we couldn't use any more of our bars. So we had like $40,000 in that project. And then we also manufactured like a surplus of labels and boxes, which is sort of what you do in the industry, is you have extra labels and boxes to cut down cost. So
Yeah.
when you need to create more bars, it's very easy to just wrap them, box them, and ship them out. So we thought we were being smart, creating extra labels and boxes. So we lost, $15,000 there on all the packaging we had to throw out. We lost probably 10 to 15,000 on all the bars we had to throw out. And then we had 3 or 4 trade shows booked. So as part of like that initial investment into my business, I booked like 4 trade shows that year, and all of them got canceled.
Yeah.
One of them took our money and ran. They wouldn't give us a refund, so we lost like $5,000 there. we lost, I think, half of our Airbnb. So each Airbnb costs like thousands of dollars. We lost half of that. And so the process of our trade shows, I think we lost like another $10,000 there. And then it was already difficult enough to, catch up on work for like marketing these new products that we had. And then we got hit with the delays for the pandemic. So we
Mhm.
started to grow, and then our manufacturer said, listen, we used to get you your products, your lead times were 4 weeks. They're going to be 4 months now. So now we're sitting like we had all this momentum, and then all of a sudden things turned for the worst. So, I mean, it seemed like everything came crashing down. It was like extremely difficult, next to impossible to stay in business during that time.
Yeah. Jeez. So with that, then how did it all come back around? Like, you guys are doing well now, or you guys are back to normal operating, or where do you guys see the company right now?
Yeah, normal operating. I mean, throughout most of this year, even 2021, a lot of the supply chain delays got worse,
Yeah.
right? Because the Suez Canal, there was a crisis there. There's an energy crisis in China right now. And it's just like globally, it's going to take a long time to recover from COVID. I mean, we
Mhm.
haven't even finished COVID yet, right?
No.
And we're dealing with another variant. Cases are spiking in Ontario, and everyone's concerned. And we're almost at the 2 year mark. Like
Yeah.
March will be 2 years. And so we haven't even gotten through this yet. And the delays and the impacts of COVID on the economy will be felt, I think, for years to come. So, yeah, it was extremely challenging. 2021 was also extremely challenging because, because we use like a whole multivitamin, let's say, like our multivitamin pack, we've got like 60 ingredients in there. And so, if you can think about ingredient shortages around the world, if you're missing one ingredient and your label has 60, well, you can't
Yeah.
manufacture that product, right? We can't just go changing our ingredient every single time something runs out. So yeah, this year was challenging, and we're projecting to get back on track January, February. Throughout most of this year, things were going well. We've signed a whole bunch of contracts with retailers for the new year that I think will be very good for us.
Awesome.
But yeah, generally speaking, it was extremely challenging. Yeah, it was next to impossible, I would say, to survive, but somehow we did.
Hey, man, that's good to hear.
Yeah,
So, I mean, for people now, we've talked about the product for a little bit here. Where can people find the product? What, tell me, give me a list again. Like, what do you guys have? And then where can people find it who are listening? I guess in
for
North
sure.
America.
Yeah, so we actually start out in the US, which is where the bulk of our products are located. So, we sell collagen protein, which is our most popular product. We have a men and women's multivitamin pack. We have an adrenal strength for anyone who's like suffering from adrenal fatigue or high levels of stress or poor sleep. That one is pretty amazing. We have an electrolyte support, a pre-workout, a BCA, and that's pretty much it. We just released an immune strength with vitamin D, vitamin C, a whole bunch of herbs and extracts, which I think is going to be a great product coming, like the winter time. And then we launched our collagen protein in Canada. So that's the only one available in Canada right now. We're on knutri.com and knutri.ca, depending on if you're in the US or Canada. And then alternatively, with Amazon, we're also on amazon.com and amazon.ca, depending on if you're in the US or in Canada.
Awesome. And then what's 2022 looking like for you personally, for the company? What are some of the things that are coming in the pipeline that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one that happened recently was we signed a contract with one of the biggest. I won't mention them, one of the biggest retailers in Canada, and so we're looking at rolling out a gradual rollout of up to 1,000 stores by the end of next year, which has been one of the biggest steps we've taken so far. And then for us, it's just continuing to grow our e-commerce platform, continuing to grow our brand, and for Canada, we're looking at bringing a lot of our products here in the spring. So our men and women's multivitamin, our BCAAs, and our pre-workout. So those will be like the four products that we bring next to Canada, and then sort of just growing what we have now, because I believe we have a pretty amazing core product line that people have responded really well to. People have been able to be successful with in terms of their health goals, and so we'll just continue to do that and hopefully keep things in stock. That's been the biggest challenge so far, is
Yeah.
keeping things in stock and making sure that we have products when people need them.
Do you have any tips for the people out there who are, you know, potentially interested in a similar line, you know, either running a supplement company, but more so like being an entrepreneur and growing your brand? Do you have any tips for listeners out there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our motto is, I guess you can see it here, is stay focused and be consistent. And that's something that's resonated with me throughout my treatment, my business journey, schooling, pretty much anything. But I'd say that the most important thing is obviously be very focused on what problem you're trying to solve with your business, and then be very consistent with your actions in terms of, finding ways to chip away at your idea, whether you're pre-launch, whether you're just trying to figure out what product it is that you want to sell in the first place. Chip away at your idea slowly, and even when you launch the product, spend time working on it, even if it's a side hustle and you have a full-time job. um, just finding times to work on it, and again, be very consistent with your efforts. So if you want to get into the supplement industry, it is very saturated. It's extremely difficult to go up against the juggernauts of the supplement world,
Yeah.
because any product you attempt to launch, you're already out. You're already trying to take market share from companies that are very well established, who not just have market share and customers, but they're typically backed by investors. And so you're sort of like David and Goliath there. You don't have a lot that you're working with. So finding out what makes you unique, and figuring out, like, are you solving a unique problem in your industry before you sort of take something to market, I think is important. So yeah, if you have an idea and you think it could revolutionize your industry, or improve someone's life, or solve a problem that is not yet solved, you'll find a way to make it successful.
Awesome. On that note, Aryan, thanks so much for joining us. Give me one more time. Where can everybody find you, and where can everybody find K Nutri?
Yeah, for sure. If you want to find me, I'm on Instagram and TikTok, more so TikTok these days. I think both of my handles are at Ari Fazeli, Ary Fazeli. And then if you want to find us at K Nutri, or at K Nutri, again on Instagram and TikTok. And then if you want to find us, just search knutri.com. If you're from Canada, it'll just redirect you to the .ca website. And if you're from the US, you can check out our long list of products and see if one of them aligns with what you're looking for. So yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This was awesome. Yeah, I haven't talked to you in a while, and so
Yeah,
it was also a nice way for you and I to catch up a little bit too.
100%. And dude, your story is so inspirational. And I mean, it speaks a lot to the importance of health and, or sorry, fitness, and how that impacts your health. And I think this is an amazing story for a lot of people to hear what you're able to accomplish and what you're able to do, and even be here because of your health. And man, every time we talk and every time we talk about this story, it absolutely blows me away. So dude, keep doing what you're doing. I'm proud of you. You know that
Yeah.
you got this.
Yeah,
You're
thank you,
killing
man.
it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm happy to chat about it, and hopefully, if I've inspired one person listening to take control of their health or get back on track, then I would consider this a very successful podcast.
Yeah, 100%. All right, man. Thanks so much for joining. Guys, this has been the Difference Makers. Hit that like button, subscribe on Instagram. Subscribe on YouTube, or follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hit that like button and subscribe down below for more content coming soon from WODProof.